Then the father said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Everything old has passed away. See, everything has become new. While he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He was lost and had been found. When I was, I think, 11 years old, I was visiting a cousin in Sharon, Massachusetts. We lived in New York. And she and I went out for a hike in a nearby wooded area not far from her home. It was a beautiful wood. There were no real paths there that I can remember, just the really tall trees and low-lying bushes. And there were a few wildflowers there and birds singing in the trees. And we collected fallen pine cones and explored the mushrooms hidden in the rotting tree trunks. We were paying no attention to time until one of us checked a watch. I imagine an adult had given us this watch. It was getting later than we thought, and we looked around and we realized we did not know where we were. My cousin did not recognize anything around us. We were deep enough in the woods that we could not see or hear any of the traffic on the roads surrounding the woods. And I remember vividly this very disorienting moment. I can still feel that disorientation. We were lost, and I was scared. We turned around and began to walk in what we thought was the direction that we had come from. And we knew that if we kept walking, there would be a road. It was not long before we found a road. It was not the same road that we had entered by, but a road we could follow, and we found our way home, where we told my aunt what had happened, and she hugged us both. I suspect there were fresh baked cookies to be had as well. I will never forget that feeling of being lost. Since then, there have been other times when I have been lost, and that first experience comes flooding back each time. And as I learned then, I know I am not alone. I know I will find my way home. We can find ourselves lost in so many different ways. We can be lost physically, as I was in the woods. We can feel lost, alone, lonely. And there are times when we can actually get stuck in our lostness. Henry David Thoreau wrote, "Not until we are lost do we find ourselves." Today's story in Luke's gospel is usually referred to as the story of the prodigal son. It is one of those iconic stories which are so familiar that we can forget to listen to them. Amy Jill Levine writes about this story, along with the stories of the lost coin and lost sheep, in her book, Short Stories by Jesus. These opening words, "There was a man who had 2 sons," introduce us to a literary convention. This is so familiar that when we hear it, we often find ourselves drawn to that younger son. We often think of God as Father. Levine cautions us, however, saying it is a parable. This is a parable, and parables do not always have what we might expect. She goes on from there to take us deeper into the parable and how it might have been heard in Jesus' time. She reminds us that there are several stories in Scripture with 2 sons, one younger and one older. Most often, the younger son is the one chosen to carry God's story forward. For example, Jacob, the younger son, steals with his mother Rebekah's help his father Isaac's blessing, which was meant for his older brother Esau. In today's story, Amy Jill tells us that the father is the one who is off the mark by giving his younger son half of his estate. By the inheritance conventions of the time, he would have received only 1/3, not half of his father's estate. The older son was due 2/3. As the story unfolds, if we are listening with new ears, everything is a bit off kilter. The younger son takes what he is given and wastes it all until he is destitute. And the older son is a grumbler who is jealous of the favor shown by his father towards his younger brother. With all that in mind, all of the main characters in this story are flawed. And embedded in this tale of flawed human beings lies mercy, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Despite our mistakes and all the straying we may do, we can come home and we can find ourselves welcomed. And even in our jealousy and resentment, in our turning away, God still comes looking for us, offering us love that was and is always there, again and again. I listened this last weekend to Krista Tippett's interview with Kate DiCamillo, an author of books for children of all ages. I went out and bought a bunch of them. I have found for myself that many of the best books for children have as much in them for children as for adults, especially adults. We are never too old for a good story. We are never too old to learn. Tippett, in her introduction, reminds us that we are all of us here, as old as we might be, some of us, we're all former children. And there is this 8-year-old inside each of us that we have much to learn from. She writes, "There is wisdom and there are capacities that we strangely relinquish when we advance to adulthood, and that we never have needed now more than ever." We need those things that our 8-year-old knew. To hold the mysterious reality that wonder and danger, heartbreak and hope live so vividly close, side by side in life. She invites us to walk with open eyes to both. DiCamillo, in her interview, talks about enlarging our hearts to hold stories. It is through stories that we find our way home. It is through stories that we make sense of the world we are living in. The stories we hear in Scripture can open doorways to see things in new and different ways. When we listen to stories like the one we heard today, one of the ways to open those doorways is to wonder, who am I in the story? And so, there was a man who had 2 sons. He loved both of them. And I wonder if he loved them equally. That is such a hard thing for us to do, to love equally. His younger son comes to him and asks for his inheritance. And defying the expected convention of the time, the father gives the younger son half his estate. Without thought, or seemingly without any backward wave or heartfelt thank you, the son goes off spending lavishly, foolishly eating and drinking, and having unthinking fun. The son eventually finds himself in a country not his own, alone, destitute, starving, willing to work feeding pigs to survive. Wallowing in his misery, he hatches a plan. He will go to his father and beg his father's forgiveness, thinking, my father feeds and cares for all of his servants. And he, the son, will offer to be a servant and take whatever the father might give him, which will be more than what he has now. Was he sincerely remorseful? That is not clear in the telling of the story. He takes the risk, however, and returns. Nothing could be worse than what he was experiencing. Back to the father. As he watches his youngest son leave without a farewell, did he wonder? Did he worry? Well, he did wait every day by the road the son left by in hopes of his return, and his waiting was rewarded. Off in the distance one day, he saw what he had hoped for and prayed for, rushing off, not knowing really why his son was returning, though surely when his son got within smelling distance, he knew that things had not gone well. Beside himself with joy, he catches up his son in his arms and his embrace. Did he notice his son had been on his knees? Did he even hear his son ask for mercy? Or were his ears and eyes open only to his joy? Shouting to his servants to bring fresh clothes and kill the fatted calf, he plans a banquet to celebrate his son's return. Forgiveness and mercy are caught up in love overflowing. His son had been lost, and now he returned, no longer lost. Behind the scenes lurks the hidden misery yet to be revealed, the older son. When his brother left with more than he was due, what did he think? Did the resentment start then, or had it always been simmering even before his brother left? And now he hears not from his father, but from the servants, from the slaves, that his father is having a banquet in his straying son's honor. This was clearly the last blow to his ego, to his pride. Now, who was lost? The younger son who had returned, or the older son lost in his resentment? This time, the father does not wait for his son to return to him. This son he seeks and reaches out to. You have had me and my love always. Can't you be joyful for me that my son, your brother, has returned? This story does not really tell us the ending. It only tells us the father loved both sons, loved them enough to allow one to get lost and return on his own, and enough to go to the other, now lost in his anger, going to him with open arms. Which is more important, the open arms or the banquet? Henri Nouwen wrote, a large part of the father's life had been spent waiting. He could not force his younger son to come home or his older son to let go of his resentments. Only they themselves could take the initiative to return. Nouwen also wrote this for himself. Coming home meant for me walking, stepping one step at a time towards the other who awaits me with open arms and wants to hold me in an eternal embrace. The Pharisees and the scribes came to Jesus grumbling because he ate with tax collectors and sinners. Instead of explaining his actions, he told them a story. Who are we in the story? Have we ever gone out on our own? Have we ever been jealous of another's fortune? Have we never ever felt unappreciated? Have we ever longed to be embraced, forgiven for what we have done or what we have said? Have we ever longed to know God's embrace? Amen.